Hi everyone, I'm Randy Nesse and delighted to be with you today for this wonderful symposium organized by Dr. Mender about octopus emotions. My job is to explain about emotions in general and why they exist. My career was all at the University of Michigan, Department of Psychiatry until 6 years ago. Then I moved to Arizona to start a center for evolution and medicine. No disclosures today. So the first kind of explanation we all are familiar with about emotions and moods is that they're products of brain mechanisms, and we've made enormous progress in understanding those mechanisms. But despite all that progress, proximate explanations leave many controversies. We're still arguing about what's a disorder and what isn't a disorder. We're arguing about diagnostic criteria. We're arguing about why there's so much comorbidity between the disorders that we treat. And it's so too bad that we have not been able to find the genetic or brain causes for any of the major psychiatric disorders. Part of the solution, I'm going to argue, is to add the other kind of explanation, that is an evolutionary explanation. Moods are products of natural selection. Well, that's an easy generalization. And why? Because the capacity for adjusting moods is useful. More specifically, individuals with mood variation have more offspring than other individuals. But the question is, how does mood give advantages? And for this symposium, we're especially interested in what species have moods and which ones don't. Again, two kinds of explanation. One, how does it work? Proximate mechanisms. That's been almost all of our research in medicine. The other half of explanation is, how did it evolve? What's its evolutionary utility? And as the Dean of Evolutionary Biology at Harvard has said so often and well, no biological problem is solved until both the proximate and the evolutionary causation has been elucidated. We are all in the clinic knowing oh too well the overwhelming burden posed by anxiety, depression, and other emotional problems. These are the problems that plague our patients and the whole world. We're desperate to find better solutions. But first we need to figure out more about them. In particular, why did moods evolve? And in particular, after that, why are painful moods so common and often so useless? This is nothing new. Students of animal behavior and ethology and behavioral ecology, everything is based on evolution. The core principle is simple. It is that brains evolved to maximize reproduction, actually reproduction of the self and one's offspring and kin. This means that we can ask how mood increases fitness. A straightforward approach has been taken by many people, describing each basic emotion or mood and specifying the function for each one. If you look on Google or even in the professional literature, you can find all kinds of people who say the function of anxiety is, or the function of depression is, as if they're parts of a machine designed by somebody who just wanted to make parts that worked well. But emotions don't correspond to different functions. Each emotion has many functions. Emotions correspond to different situations. Emotions, moods, and affects are all useful responses, but they're only useful if they get expressed in the right situation. Just like pain, cough, shivering, and sweating, they do us good in the right situation. This means also that bad feelings are symptoms, not diseases, unless they're dysregulated. Emotions and feelings are coordinated suites of response with different aspects. People used to argue a lot about which came first. Now it's pretty clear that they're all coordinated, but not perfectly. Sometimes one part is missing. In particular, feeling sometimes is missing. All of us one time or another have seen someone say, "I'm not angry," with intense passion. Feeling is not always there. That's very relevant to our discussion today about octopus emotions. The background of emotions, their origin, is the fascinating part. It goes all the way back to one-celled animals, having a capacity for arousal when it's beneficial. But then those emotions gradually differentiate into ways of coping with opportunity and ways of coping with threats, gradually differentiating to cope with different kinds of opportunity and different kinds of threats. And note the overlapping boughs on the tree. The long arguments about whether each of these emotions is entirely separate is a pre-evolutionary argument. In fact, they're overlapping suites of responses. Today's topic is octopuses and what feelings they have, what moods they have. I'm not going to talk more about that because you have several world experts to give you fascinating talks in the next few minutes. But I'll just summarize by saying octopuses certainly have different states for different situations, turning different colors, hiding sometimes, actively going away sometimes, and sometimes squirting a jet of ink. Natural selection has shaped special states for nearly all species. We don't want to call them emotions, but they sure are special states. Desire is characteristic of most animals as they're stalking prey. Fear for their prey. And then there's consummation. When you get what you want, I bet it feels good for that mosquito, but who knows? A rat swimming, that's stress, and stress is useful. Hibernation, a state for so many animals that's crucial for their survival. And even bacteria have special states. When there isn't any food, they create spores that allow them to endure through the bad times. Of course, the ones we care about are the big three bad feelings that we see every day, and we experience them, of course. Now, the first is fear or anxiety, induced by situations that involve threat of a loss. Second, there's sadness and grief, caused by experiencing a loss. And notice from an evolutionary viewpoint that low mood and depression are not the same as sadness and grief. They come from situations in which effort is failing and being wasted. What about high and low mood together? How can we understand why they exist and how they give an advantage? Well, situations differ in their propitiousness, that is, the degree of payoff they give for the amount of effort invested. When payoffs are high mood reaps rewards by taking risks and putting a lot of energy in. But when payoffs will be wasted, low mood reduces risk and effort. Notice that there are many subtypes depending on the kinds of situation and resources at issue. If I had to say it in general, why are high and low mood, why do they evolve? It's to adjust the direction and intensity of effort as a function of opportunities and threats in a situation. The most fundamental situation for almost every organism is foraging. And in fact, these systems and the dopaminergic blips that come from success guide our foraging, and with any animal. If you've ever gone picking raspberries, you know how exciting it is when you first find a bush that's all full of berries, and then as you reach for fewer and fewer, smaller and smaller berries, the motivation just goes away. This has been quantified in one of the fundamental theorems of behavioral ecology by Eric Charnov. It's called the marginal value theorem. I'll spare you the calculus, but the graphical interpretation is quite simple. It takes this amount of time to find a new bush, and once you find a bush, you get a lot of berries at first, and then fewer and fewer and fewer until they're all gone. And I think almost everyone here has experienced a high motivation early on, and then those dopamine blips go away, and there's low motivation. And if everything's working perfectly, the organism stops right here, because that gets the maximum number of berries per minute. Turns out that almost every organism does this, and the mechanisms overlap dramatically in the brain, and that's why they're there. There are times, however, when the costs are greater than the benefits for anything you can do, in which case the best thing to do is nothing. And a motto for those times is, don't just do something, stand there. Of course, we humans don't just pursue berries. Most of our resources are social. We like friends and status and sex and relationships. And in fact, these are higher level goals. And this is a diagram I created some years ago about the global emotions we experience in the situations that arouse during goal pursuit. Before, while we're pursuing an opportunity, we experience hope or desire. If we succeed, happiness or pleasure. If we fail, disappointment. If we are experiencing a threat, anxiety and fear. If we succeed, relief. If we don't, sadness or pain. And I was very pleased with this until I talked with some philosopher friends at the University of Michigan who pointed out that these are very old ideas. Indeed, Plato, the Stoics, Cicero, Hume, and medieval philosophers were all acutely aware that emotions respond to what a person's trying to do in life. I don't know why we don't teach this to our psychiatry residents as a fundamental theorem for understanding what's going on with patients. William Blake summarized this also many, many years ago, saying, "If any could desire what he is incapable of possessing, despair must be his eternal lot." That's characteristic for so many of our patients. Eric Klinger is a psychologist who took this principle and put it in an evolutionary context, and he's the one who's inspired much of my work. I think the perfect depressogenic situation is one that so many people find themselves in. They're trapped, pursuing an unreachable goal that they can't give up. You recall I mentioned ideographic individual goals. One very practical outcome of this is that I've proposed that we don't just need a review of systems like we do in medicine. For psychiatry, we need a review of social systems, a systematic assessment of the person's resources and goals and success or failure anticipated for social goals, occupation, children and family, income, abilities and appearance, and love and sex. I found it so helpful to review these things systematically with every patient. What about abnormal emotions? Evolutionary medicine asks why natural selection didn't do a better job. Why do we have an appendix, a spine that causes so many problems, and Lord help us, a narrow birth canal? This is a different question. It's not why some people get sick, but why we all are vulnerable. Evolutionary medicine is the field that tries to explain why bodies are vulnerable. That is, why didn't natural selection do a better job? It's simply the intersection of the basic science of evolutionary biology and its practical applications in medicine. Evolutionary medicine asks a fundamentally different question that requires a major change in perspective. From a mechanic's description, which is the perspective most of us took in medical school, to that of an engineer asking why the system has left vulnerable. So why are anxiety and mood so common? Well, partly because life is hard. Bad feelings are useful. Brain mechanisms are prone to failure. Yes, but the normal mechanisms often generate useless emotions. And this principle, I think, could resolve some of those conundrums and debates that we talked about at the beginning. So how can normal mechanisms give rise to useless emotions? The best example is the smoke detector principle that I'll talk about in a moment, but there are 4 others for another time. Lots of useless emotions come from normal mechanisms. False alarms in a smoke detector are normal and necessary to be sure that you're warned about any actual fire. And if you're in the African savanna and there might be a lion hiding in the grass, a 1% chance based on the cues you see and hear. Should you panic? Yes, you absolutely should. It can save your life. However, there are going to be many, many more false alarms that are perfectly normal. The smoke detector principle means that most alarms are normal but unnecessary, and it's relevant for the rest of medicine as well. This is why we can safely block pain, cough, fever, and anxiety and depression safely, except for that one time in 1,000. Huge implications for psychopharmacology. Anyone who says that evolution suggests you should not treat people with medications is just not paying attention. For those interested in more, I have a book out recently about good reasons for bad feelings, and there's a chapter in Kaplan and Sadak. I look forward to your questions.